This is the final chapter of the mini-series, Saints and Sinners. Thank you for listening, for staying with the story, and for following it to the end. Part 3 begins now. Previously on Saints and Sinners, the club survived a police raid and turned public suspicion into sympathy. Caleb warned Monroe before the warrant hit, and the evidence vanished before officers could touch it. The chief tightened his grip behind the scenes while planning a campaign built on the very community he was privately exploiting. And in the final moments, Caleb came face to face with the man Monroe once tried to erase, his ex, alive and waiting in the dark. Saints and sinners looked different in daylight. The velvet curtains were pulled back, letting in thin strips of morning sun that softened the neon glow. The stage, where bodies usually moved under colored lights, now held a polished podium and a row of folding chairs. Round tables filled the main floor, dressed in white linen and small arrangements of white roses. Champagne flutes replaced shot glasses. The music that once rattled ribs had been traded for low jazz, drifting from hidden speakers. Detective Garrett stood near the back wall in full uniform. The weight of it felt deliberate today. His badge was polished, his belt heavy at his waist. He had been asked to attend in an official capacity, visible proof that law enforcement and the black queer community could occupy the same room without conflict. He stood straight, hands loosely clasped in front of him, scanning the room the way he always did. Monroe moved easily through the crowd, tailored suit sharp against the daylight, hair sculpted high, face precise. Monroe greeted donors, embraced community organizers, kissed cheeks. The club manager in the night became a host in the morning without missing a beat. Nothing about them suggested worry. Caleb worked the room with a tray of champagne. He wore a fitted button-down, sleeves rolled to the forearms. The daylight caught the curve of his neck, the clean line of his jaw. He smiled when spoken to, refreshed glasses, kept moving. From across the room, he looked calm. Garrett watched him longer than he meant to. Caleb felt it. His head lifted slightly before he could stop himself. Their eyes met across the tables, just long enough to acknowledge that the space between them was carrying more than the crowd could see. Caleb looked away first. Chief Warren Cole stepped onto the stage to applause. He adjusted the microphone once, smoothing the front of his tailored navy suit. The room quieted for him quickly. He had a way of holding attention without raising his voice. This community, he began, deserves protection without prejudice, partnership without suspicion. He spoke about unity, about rebuilding trust, about making space for voices that had too often been sidelined. He thanked Saints and Sinners for hosting, called it a symbol of resilience, a symbol of what happens when people create spaces for themselves instead of waiting to be invited. Garrett listened without expression. He knew how polished the chief could sound. He also knew what he had seen in that alley. As the chief continued, his phone vibrated against the podium. A subtle interruption, almost nothing. He did not reach for it at first. He finished the sentence he was on, took a measured sip of water. Then, with the kind of casualness that reads as confidence, he glanced down at the screen. His smile held. The color did not leave his face, but his thumb paused. On the screen was a photograph. It was a photo of the chief stepping out of the back alley of Saints and Sinners at night, the black SUV visible behind him. The side entrance door still cracked open, the timestamp glowing in the corner. No text accompanied the photo message, just the image. The chief's eyes rested on it for a fraction longer than necessary. Then he locked the phone and set it face down beside his notes. As I was saying, he continued smoothly, lifting his gaze back to the crowd. This campaign for mayor will not be about division. It will be about accountability, partnership, and a city where every community feels protected. Applause filled the room again. Garrett watched him closely. If the message had landed, the chief did not show it. His posture remained relaxed. He finished his speech with practiced warmth and stepped down into the crowd, shaking hands, accepting congratulations. From across the room, Monroe's eyes flicked briefly toward the chief's phone on the podium, then back to his face. Caleb stood still for a moment behind the bar, tray lowered slightly, studying the chief the way someone studies a door they are unsure is locked. The music resumed, light and polite. Outside, the city moved as usual. Inside, saints and sinners under pressed linens and polite applause, the illusion cracked. Nothing exploded, no one raised their voice. But the room no longer belonged to the chief the way it had an hour earlier. It belonged to whoever had taken that photograph. And the chief, smiling for cameras and donors alike, stood there knowing that someone now held proof of his back alley dealings and that whoever had taken that photo could decide when his campaign lived or died. The applause carried out into the street before thinning into ordinary city noise. By the time Garrett stepped onto the sidewalk, the club had already begun to fold back into itself. Volunteers lingered near the entrance. Campaign signs were stacked against the brick wall. The white tablecloths would be gone within the hour. Detective Rivera joined him without speaking. Garrett did not turn around. He watched the reflection in the tinted window across the street instead. Through the glass, he could see Monroe inside, head tilted slightly as they spoke to a donor, posture loose and controlled. Caleb moved behind the bar in daylight clothes, sleeves rolled, refilling champagne as if the room still required service. Rivera joined him on the sidewalk and stood beside him without speaking. She had watched the chief closely enough to recognize the performance when she saw it. The man had absorbed whatever flashed across his phone without altering his posture or voice. He had finished the speech as if nothing had touched him. Garrett caught it the same second Rivera did, the slight pause when the chief checked his phone, the tightening at the corner of his mouth before he reset and kept selling the room. Rivera stayed facing the club, scanning the entrance as volunteers stacked campaign signs by the door. The brunch was theater. Garrett didn't spell it out, and he wasn't going anywhere near the chief's suspicious activity, at least not yet. One wrong move and internal affairs would be back on him before he even built a case. So he left the chief alone and turned to the safer evidence first. Permits, delivery records, vendor contracts tied to the warehouse. He would stack proof before he ever aimed his direction toward the chief. Garrett made it half a block before his phone buzzed. It was Caleb saying that he and Garrett needed to talk. He read it once, locked the screen, and slid the phone back into his pocket. Caleb drove without noticing the streets he passed. He only knew he needed to put space between himself and the motel room where his ex had reappeared after years of silence. The smell of that place clung to him, cheap detergent, stale smoke, gasoline from the parking lot outside, and underneath it all, the memory of a voice that used to tell him who he belonged to. The ex had leaned in close when he spoke, like nothing had ever burned down between them. Like Monroe had not pulled Caleb out of that old club years ago and given him a couch, a job, and a version of safety that came with rules but no fists. Like saints and sinners had not become the only place Caleb had ever felt claimed without being owned. By the time he reached Garrett's building, the shaking had stopped, but the pressure in his chest had not. He knocked once. Garrett opened the door before Caleb could knock again. The detective had already changed out of his uniform. The campaign brunch at Saints and Sinners was over. The cameras were gone. The chief had smiled for donors and spoken about unity. Now Garrett stood in a dark shirt, sleeves pushed back, watch still on his wrist. He looked off duty. He was not. His eyes moved over Caleb, immediately assessing. A professional habit that never turned off. Caleb stepped inside. Garrett closed the door behind Caleb and stood there for a second longer than necessary, as if measuring what had just walked into his apartment. By now, what they were to each other was no longer simple. Caleb had started as a distraction, a body in the dark on a night Garrett hadn't known would change his case. But somewhere between the investigation and the confession, between the raid and the warehouse, Caleb had become personal. And that was dangerous. Caleb looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. His shoulders were tight. His jaw worked like he was holding something back. Garrett studied him. He told Caleb he knew he wasn't telling him everything. He didn't raise his voice, didn't accuse. He just said it plainly. Caleb didn't deny it this time. He told him his ex had shown up at Saints and Sinners without warning, walked into one of the upstairs rooms like he still belonged there, and was now staying at a motel across town, waiting and watching like he had never really left. He told him about the way his ex was making all these threats, talking about Monroe pulling him out of that old club and putting him on a couch and telling him he deserved better, about the ex saying Monroe had tried to burn him alive, about how his ex was back and had a plan to get Monroe alone inside Saints and Sinners and light it up. The words came fast at first, then slower. Caleb wasn't just reporting facts. He was reliving everything at once. Garrett listened in full detective mode, absorbing timelines, motives, escalation patterns. But he also saw something else, the way Caleb's hands started to shake when he mentioned the fire from years ago, the way his voice hollowed out when he talked about the old beatings from his ex. Garrett stepped closer and cut him off, not harshly, but firm enough to slow him down. Caleb's voice had started to thin, the edge of it turning towards something fragile, and Garrett could see where it was heading. But there was another reason too. The more Caleb said, the more he was handing over details that would not disappear just because they were spoken in a bedroom instead of an interrogation room. Garrett knew he might have to use every word someday. So he stopped him before he gave too much. Then he reached for Caleb. He pulled him in and wrapped his arms around him. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't possessive. Caleb froze at first. His body remembered different arms that shoved, grabbed, held too tight for the wrong reasons. For a split second, he saw flashes of the past with his ex, a slammed door, a cracked lip, the smell of smoke from the old club fire. Then he felt Garrett, the kind of strength that didn't have to prove itself. Garrett's arms wrapped around him without squeezing too tight, without trapping him. His hands rested firm at Caleb's back, like he was holding something valuable. Garrett's chest was warm beneath Caleb's cheek. There was power in him, but it wasn't reckless. His ex had always grabbed first and explained later. Always held like Caleb was something to pin down, to discipline, to dominate for the sake of control. Even affection had come with conditions. Garrett held him differently. Garrett's hands moved down his back. The heat between them rose. Stress, fear, relief, attraction, it all blended into something physical. Caleb didn't pull away. He looked up and asked quietly if he could have him. Garrett smiled. They didn't rush. They moved toward the bedroom like two men who already knew the shape of each other. The kind of slow closeness that comes from familiarity, not novelty. The kind that allows silence. They undressed without spectacle. Hands traced lines already memorized. Garrett's mouth found Caleb's shoulder, then his neck, slower than before, less about conquest and more about connection. Caleb pressed back into him like he needed to feel the full weight of someone choosing him. The bed creaked under them. They moved together in a long, deliberate motion, stress draining out with every inhale and exhale, the kind of intimacy that makes time blur. For a while there was no club, no X, no fires, just skin, and the steady rise and fall of bodies that had decided, at least for that moment, to trust each other. When it was over, Caleb lay there staring at the ceiling, chest rising hard. Then reality returned. He said he had to go. If he didn't get back soon, his ex would start asking questions. And if the ex started asking questions, it would not be good. Caleb told Garrett enough. Dominic was planning something at Saints and Sinners, something involving fire. Garrett sat up immediately. "Before you leave," he said, "let me check something." He crossed the room without bothering to dress, and Caleb watched him walk, broad shoulders, steady stride, the kind of body built for force, but disciplined enough to hold back. Caleb felt the pull of him again, even in the middle of fear. Garrett opened his laptop and searched the ex's name again, deeper this time. Old reports surfaced: the assault complaint, withdrawn, the warehouse fire inquiry. Questioned, but never charged, a pattern of crimes that had slipped through gaps. Garrett turned the screen toward Caleb. If the ex tried this kind of arson attempt again, Garrett could move on it. Attempted arson with prior incidents. That was enough to hold up to arrest him and bring him into the precinct. He saw the angle immediately. If they caught the ex mid-move, it wouldn't just remove the threat, it would give Garrett leverage. Monroe would have to answer questions. Garrett could continue his investigation on the back end of protecting Caleb from the ex. He looked at Caleb. This wasn't just about protecting him, it was about the job. Garrett told him plainly, if the ex makes a move and he knows in time he can take him in. Caleb understood what that meant. Garrett was still a detective, and Caleb was still connected to the machine Garrett was trying to dismantle. They held each other's gaze for a moment longer. Then Caleb got dressed. He stepped back into the night, carrying more than one secret. And Garrett stood in his apartment knowing the next fire could be the one that burned his case wide open. The motel room was narrow and poorly lit. One lamp worked. The television played a late-night news segment with the sound muted. Dominic, Caleb's ex, sat on the edge of the bed, elbows on his knees, staring at the carpet. He replayed Caleb's face before he walked out the door earlier. Caleb had been scared, and Dominic knew it. There was a time when Caleb didn't scare easily, when he followed him into rooms without hesitation, when loyalty felt natural, almost devotional. Back then, Caleb was younger, restless, hungry for direction. He liked men who seemed certain, men who made decisions for him, men who said, "Stand here, don't talk to him, leave with me." He had been that man. Before the fire, control had felt like protection. He told himself that. Caleb was soft in certain ways, too trusting, too open. The club was ruthless in those old days. Favors, leverage, quiet threats, dressed up as opportunity. He kept Caleb close because it gave him leverage. It guaranteed Caleb answered to him alone. And if he's honest, it meant Caleb didn't leave. The night of the fire was supposed to solve a different problem. Monroe wanted control and fewer risks. He had become a risk, asking too many questions, pushing for more money. Smoke swallowed everything before he could process betrayal. Heat tore through the ceiling. He remembers glass breaking. He remembers crawling. He understood in that moment that Monroe lit the match and walked away. After that, there was no dramatic rescue, no grand return. Months of physical recovery followed by years of strategic silence. And through all of it, Monroe remained unfinished business. But Caleb was leverage. Dominic stood and walked to the nightstand, opened the drawer slowly. Inside sat a small, clear bottle filled halfway with gasoline, a folded rag, a cheap plastic lighter, everything placed in order and ready. Years ago, he had been left in a burning building, smoke in his lungs, skin split open from shattered glass. Monroe had walked away believing he was dead. He survived what was meant to end him. Now he was done, waiting for his revenge. Across town, saints and sinners had already shifted back to business. The brunch tables were gone. White tablecloths removed, campaign signs stacked near the door. By nightfall, the space looked the way it always did. Low lighting, security at the entrance, music loud enough to swallow conversation. Staff moved with routine precision. Bartenders counted cash. Security checked earpieces. Dancers stretched near the back hallway. Upstairs, Monroe stood alone in their office. Monroe opened a filing cabinet and removed a metal lockbox. Unlocked it without hesitation. Inside were 4 items: a charred matchbook stamped with the old club's name, a newspaper clipping documenting the fire, a photograph taken weeks before everything burned, and beneath those, sealed in a thin evidence sleeve, a single document Dominic never knew existed. Monroe reviewed the photograph first. The 3 of them stood too close in it, Dominic confident, Caleb younger, Monroe in full drag glam, contour, lashes, lips textured with precision, a master at painting their face like armor. It had been taken before Dominic started asking for more money, before he mistook access for authority. Monroe did not feel regret. Dominic had always been volatile. The night he put his hands on Caleb removed any hesitation Monroe might have had. Watching Caleb try to excuse it had been worse than the bruises. Monroe had known men like him before. Men who confused control with devotion. Men who believed fear was intimacy. Eliminating Dominic had not felt like cruelty, it had felt like correction. Monroe's thumb rested on the edge of the sealed evidence sleeve. The last safeguard, receipts tied to Dominic's name. Records of materials purchased days before the old club fire. Messages that placed him in financial conflict with the club at the exact right time. Enough to ensure that when the fire came, there was a clean line of evidence in his direction. Downstairs, the music grew louder. The line outside curved around the block. Bartenders were already overselling premium bottles of liquor. The club was thriving. Saints and sinners was the black gay community in motion, all of it moving under one roof Monroe had built. No one below knew the night had already been decided. The club was in its last hour. The crowd had thinned just enough to feel exclusive. The music no longer rattled the walls. In one of the back rooms, a dancer knelt between a well-dressed couple, jackets off, ties loosened, wedding rings catching the red glow of a single lamp. The air was warm, heavy with perfume and sweat. The door was locked. The music outside filtered in as a dull vibration. The dancer moved with practiced ease. Then he stopped. At first, it was only a scent, not cologne, not skin, it was smoke. A thin grey line slipped under the bottom of the door. He rose slowly, the couple murmuring in confusion behind him, and crossed the room. When his hand touched the door, he felt heat. He unlocked it. The hallway was already clouding over. The music kept playing for 3 beats too long. Then someone screamed. The shift from pleasure to panic was immediate. Glasses shattered near the bar. Security shouted over the music. Then the music cut entirely. Smoke rolled low across the floor, then climbed. Patrons stumbled toward the entrance, some laughing in disbelief until their lungs told them this was real. Upstairs, Monroe felt the change before the alarm went off. Caleb was mid-sentence when the alarm triggered. They both went still. Then the shouting began below. Monroe opened the office door. Smoke was already rising up the stairwell. Caleb's voice dropped. "This is Dominic's doing." Monroe did not answer. Their eyes moved once down the hallway, calculating distance, exit routes, airflow. They had always known Dominic might come back. They had just not known when. They headed toward the back staircase, the quiet exit reserved for private clients. Flames licked along the lower wall. They stopped. Caleb's chest tightened. "We need to go." "We will," Monroe said calmly. They turned down the longer corridor, away from the main stairs, the smoke heavier there. And then he stepped out of it. Dominic emerged through the haze as if he had been standing there all along, waiting for the right moment to reveal himself. His face was calm, not frantic. He told Monroe that this time they would be the one trapped in the fire, and he would make sure the job was finished properly. That's when boots pounded up the stairwell behind him. Detective Garrett hit him hard enough to break his speech. Dominic staggered, rage finally cracking through. Detective Rivera moved fast, cuffs snapping around his wrists before he could recover. Smoke pressed in from both ends of the hallway. Sirens cut through the night outside. Firefighters flooded the entrance below. Patrons spilled onto the sidewalk, coughing, clutching each other, phones raised to capture what would be tomorrow's headline. Dominic was dragged outside and shoved into the back of a patrol car, fury spilling out of him in words no one could fully hear. Flames pushed through the upper windows of Saints and Sinners, bright against the dark sky. Monroe stood across the street and watched it burn. Reporters gathered quickly, microphones lifted, cameras already rolling. "This was an attack," Monroe said clearly. "A black queer safe space targeted in this city." Flashbulbs burst. "We have been here before, and we are still here. We will rebuild. Whether that's here or somewhere that understands our value." Across the street, Garrett approached, smoke clinging to his clothes. Monroe stepped toward him and pressed a sealed evidence sleeve into his hand. "You'll find everything you need," Monroe said quietly. "And a little extra evidence for the case you've been working on." Garrett looked at the sleeve, then at Monroe, and understood exactly what they were doing. They were handing him Dominic for the fire and for everything else tied to the club's quieter operations. Enough to build a case that extended beyond arson. He knew Monroe was playing the situation. He also knew he needed a clean arrest, a strong charge, and a way to keep Caleb protected. So he took the evidence. He would take the win on the fire and the other illegal activity, and he would keep pulling the thread until he knew how far Monroe's control really reached. Behind them, Saints and Sinners burned, but Monroe's gaze was already fixed beyond the flames,